Hello, and welcome to Analysis Paralysis. Again, in October, we're a little light on content because it's been a busy month, but we did take a trip out this weekend to Protospiel Madison, and the experience in general is pretty similar to what you might have seen on our Protospiel Chicago vidcast, but we still wanted to go through, review the games we played, kind of talk about what worked, what didn't, and give you a little bit of the insight into the board game design process. So I believe that you're up first, Jen.
Okay, so I played a total of 6 games. My first game of the day was called Make a Killing, and it is by Shad and Megan Kendall, and it was kind of a assassination-based game where you're taking out contracts and finding people and killing them. And this was this designer's first game, and it's kind of funny. I sort of recognize that because I think the most common mistake for first-time designers is you just want to throw all this cool stuff in at once, and you want to do this and this and this and this, and it ends up that it doesn't work together and it's too much. And from the designers I've talked to, what you really got to do is strip down your game to its very core and make sure the core is fun before you build up on it. And right now this game had a little too much going on at once. I think the biggest problem with it was there was too much randomness in too many places, which sometimes made doing nothing better than doing anything because the risk of doing anything was too high. But there were a lot of good things about it. The weapon mechanics were really cool. So they had melee weapons that had like a high chance of success, but you had to be like right next to your victim. And they had guns that had a larger range, so you could be further away from your target, but they were less accurate and stuff like that. And that part of it was really cool. But I think what they really need to do is pare it down right now and get it to its core and work on that before they build it back up.
Was there an identifiable core yet?
I think so, of moving around and planning where you're going and what you're going to do.
I think that it's critical for games, as for just about any product, that you have a differentiating feature, something that makes your game unique and is fun. If you don't have that, you don't really have a game. It's very important. Certainly walking around, I saw another table that advertised that they had a deck builder, and I'm like, oh boy, another deck builder. I haven't played 200 of those in the last year. What was it? Was it Protospiel Milwaukee where we played a deck builder, and the only feedback I had was, it's a deck builder. I've played this before.
Deck builder is a very saturated market right now.
You better have a pretty good twist. You better at least be coming at it from a Mystic Vale direction before you even consider doing another deck builder right now. While Jen was off playing Make a Killing, I was demoing one of my own games called Culinary Clash. We talked about this one on the Protospiel Chicago podcast because I demoed it there. I have a bit of a freedom and freezer problem. I name all my games starting with C words. I don't really know that I intended to do that, but kind of just happened. So for Protospiel Chicago, I didn't really have any time that month to get anything together, so I just kind of put what I had on the table, and it wasn't really in a very good working state. Between now and then, while I haven't been producing content for you guys, I've actually been putting quite a bit of time into thinking through this game to get ready for this Protospiel. So before I kind of a spatial worker placement mechanic for acquiring resources, but it wasn't working because it disadvantaged players too late, and it meant that I had to do stuff with moving turn order, and I really didn't want to introduce that level of complexity into the game. So I just kind of replaced it with a series of cards that you could acquire. And then I changed the cards so that you had to remove one every turn no matter what you were doing, which set a timer on the game. I prefer games with guaranteed end conditions where the game progresses towards the end by the mere fact of playing the game. You're not waiting for someone to score 25 points every turn, counts down a clock. That prevents you from having a game that runs away in length, and so I like that as a design thing. And I was worried about the way that I was scoring points. I think it worked out a lot better than I was expecting it to, but I still think I'm going to end up making some tweaks. I ended up designing the point cards under the assumption that one of the core actions in the game, cooking, that you could only do it once per turn, and then I forgot, oh, you can actually do that twice per turn, which threw off everything I wanted those cards to be, threw off the point values. The core of this game is that you have a grill onto which you put entrees, and then in subsequent turns, the entrees cook, and you can't do anything with them until they're cooked at the right level, and if you let them go too long, then they're wasted. So what I want in the game is a tension between having to take other actions, but also manage the timing on your grill. And so I'm kind of in that place right now, but letting you cook twice is kind kind of taking away some of that tension. So the next thing I want to try is letting you cook once. And if that works out, then I don't have to redo the cards. My concern is you might get too many resources that you, in fact, do need to cook twice to consume all of them. So there's always that kind of balance there. But I've got a few other good ideas that I don't necessarily want to talk about quite yet, but I have a few things that I want to test out among my friends, and hopefully by Protospiel Milwaukee, I'll be in a position where I'm pretty comfortable with the game.
Okay, the next game I played was Atmos Pug, and that was developed by Niles Breacher. And if that sounds familiar, Atmos Pug is a mobile game, and the developer of this mobile game, this is kind of an interesting story, had a contest for creating a physical game based on their IP. So they had a contest, and Niles won that contest, and so he's developing a game with them using, all their artwork and using this IP, and it's very clearly almost done. In fact, he told me their original plan was to have it released by last Gen Con, but that was really aggressive and they didn't make that goal. Since it's based on the mobile game, it's kind of like a nice, light, cute puzzle game. There's a adorable little pug puppy and you have to get him to his home using cards with different arrows on them, and you kind of have to build a machine based on different cards. Like one card might say you have to use 3 of these cards and still have them get to the end, and the other one might say you have to build cards in these shapes. It actually kind of reminded me of Chocolate Fix in that there's cards telling you what you need to do and you have to move the pieces around to figure out how to do that. It was definitely a lighter family game. The big thing he was testing is he had a couple different ways to play the game competitively. It is just a single player puzzle game, and I honestly think I would buy it for that because I thought it was fun that way. But he was trying a real-time race versus a turn-based, you pick a piece and then place it, and then someone else picks a piece and then places it. And it actually seemed like people liked those two modes 50-50, so I don't know if he's going to have to pick one or if they're just going to include both in the rule book. I don't think having multiple ways to play a game using the same pieces is necessarily a bad thing. But we didn't have too much to suggest because it's really near publication. We just had a few suggestions for just iconography and stuff like that.
Okay, so about the time she wrapped up with that, I wrapped up with Culinary Clash, so we got back together and tried to play a couple short ones before we broke for lunch. First one that we stumbled across was a 10-minute game called Diversion. Do you remember the developer's name?
Oh gosh, I'm gonna mispronounce this and I'm sorry. It's Rohan Dargad. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but that's the best I can get.
This was a really simple abstract strategy game. There's kind of a grid with 6 lines on it. At the top and the bottom, there's circles representing the 2 players, and there's lines, paths that go between them. And you would, over the course of the game, assign a strength to each circle and then draw some connecting lines horizontally to bridge the paths. And then at the end of the game, you would start at a number, walk up a path. Anytime you saw a line, you would take that path, and then you'd end up at another number on the other side, and then they'd kind of have a combat, and the higher number would win, and there'd be a 1-to-1 correspondence between the items on each side. I've seen Mario Party mini games that are kind of similar to this, where you gotta actually look at the top, and there's an item you gotta get, and you gotta trace through the paths to figure out which column that you can go on. But it was pretty straightforward and elegant, but also really simple and probably solvable.
Yeah, it's definitely something you'd want to sell at the micro game level of a $10 box.
Yep, and he was looking at basically trying to publish a few different maps on cards and then kind of on the other side give some power-ups. I'd be more inclined to go for it if there was some kind of dynamically built board, like some tiles. And I do want to see some power-ups. I do want to see just a little bit more meat there for me to consider this as something that I would actually play. I'm still not sure that it's enough of my kind of game to pick it up, but I'm definitely worried in its current state it's something that you would sell a $2 print and play of, and that's about all you would ever be able to get out of it.
Actually kind of liked it. It was a nice thought game. It didn't
overstay its welcome.
Yeah, it did. It was short enough. I think it would be worth it.
That's always something you got to be careful too, is making sure that your game is good enough to hold the attention that it is demanding. Kind of on that note, the next one was The Potion Master's Apprentice, and who was the designer on this one?
That was Marcin
Zaricki. That's almost certainly wrong, but
we tried.
So, this was a negotiation, and he'd like to say bidding game, but bidding is isn't really the right way. It's really much more about negotiation. Plays up to 6, but you're only interacting with your 2 neighbors, and between the 2 of you, there's kind of these cards that determine what combinations you and your opponent can get, and you're playing a couple of number cards that add or subtract together, and as long as you land on the card, you're each going to get something, but it's up to you to kind of negotiate what you want, what you don't want with your neighbors. And then you get those and you kind of do some resource management, apply it to some cards. And I know that Jen wasn't a huge fan of this one.
No, I am not a fan of negotiation games in general. Like, I barely tolerate the negotiation in Yedo, and that's highly structured negotiation. So it's a genre I can't really tolerate at all. So I actually had to drop out a couple of rounds in just because I couldn't take it, which is nothing against the game. It's just negotiation is my kryptonite. It automatically turns me off on anything.
Well, one nice thing with the structure of the game is you could drop out without impacting it in any way.
Yeah,
but I stuck around. I didn't particularly like this one either. I think my main problem is the negotiation there wasn't any tension to it. Because you're always negotiating with the same people, and the cards were structured so that half the cards were you wanted to agree with your opponent on something, you'd get more stuff. But the other half the cards were ones where either you or your opponent did better, and there was no reason to negotiate with someone at that point because you couldn't come to an agreement on something that would help both of you. So if you were negotiating, you negotiate an agreement that helps one of you, and I suppose you could lie about it, but if you lie about it, you're negotiating with that person for the rest of the game. You can't possibly trust them. So
I wonder if it would have, and I kind of wish I thought of this yesterday when I actually could give feedback. I wonder if it'd be better if they took the lying element out of it completely, like you had to show your card.
Well, I just kind of think if the core of the game was negotiation, there wasn't enough interesting to the negotiation. As soon as I saw that a card was going to benefit only one of us, I'm like, I'm putting down a random number somewhere in the middle. Just don't bust us. And I'm kind of going to hope that you play into my card. Whereas if they help both of us, I'd be like, we can agree that we can take this. It's still no tension. One of the other problems is that it was basically always better to have more resources than it was to get necessarily wild resources.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the ones that gave you few resources, they were wild, but I'd still rather just have a ton of resources. And then at that point, it kind of came down to what cards did you draw. It was supposed to be a light game, but the core of the game was supposed to be that negotiating with your neighbor, and I don't think it quite hit it. That was about when we took a break for lunch, but we had a pretty full afternoon as well.
So our next game that we played was called Card Commander, and that was by Hunter Rickert and Paul Rickert. And this was kind of a battle card game where everything blew up, and that was probably the best part, is everything blew up.
It pretty much straight up attack and defense. Your units have a defense and they do attack. You attack other people's units to destroy them. You get some money, you build some cards, you blow some stuff up, you get some more money, and then it moves along. I actually think this was the highlight of the Protospiel for us. Well, for me. Even though it wasn't usually the kind of game I like to play, it did a few things really well. I kind of liked the way that you could either pay the cost of a card to put it out, or you could save it and then trash it and get that much back. So you had to choose between power now and money to actually do things later. And while there was a lot of heavy blowing up and people getting picked on, the blowing up was heavy enough that who got picked on basically rotated the whole time, so it wasn't really personal.
Me and Jason like to use the phrase, the whole game is overpowered. Like, you read a card and you're like, this is overpowered. But then you read another card and you're like, oh, this is overpowered too. And then suddenly you realize, well, the whole game is overpowered, so everything just balances out.
There were a few definite development issues with the game. Some of the cards were really hard to read. As in, they had a lot of text on them, and you needed to read opponents' cards to see what they had, like armor and stuff, and what kind of attack they could do. And a lot of that could be condensed into iconography, because a lot of it's very repetitive.
Yeah, it definitely needed less text, more icons. The downtime was pretty much the big issue in that game.
The biggest thing I suggested was to work on the downtime, so that's part of doing the reading. And if you can shift any maintenance into another person's attack phase, kind of like what Mystic Veil does, it has you start flipping cards while the next person's doing things. That reducing the downtime in the game, I think, is going to be the critical challenge on this one.
But I hope they stick with it, because I'd be excited to actually see it published.
The other interesting thing is on the last turn, I was putting out units, because putting out units that survive at the end are worth points, but it ended up being that there was one unit I probably shouldn't have put out, because I ended up handing points to my opponent, and that's something I didn't realize. I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's definitely just another interesting thing to note. So we actually took about 10 minutes of footage from this playtest, so you can kind of get a feel of what a playtest is actually like, the kind of stuff that we might interject in the middle of just playing the game. That's not just playing the game, you're talking the whole time. So I think we're gonna roll that footage for a few minutes, and we'll meet you back here.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, I think...
Oh, right. This guy didn't.
Yeah, keep those poor infantry under cover.
Yeah.
I'm going to spend the 5 money to sabotage your tank, which I think kills it. Do you actually get the stuff you get via...
Yeah, could she kill my tank with that and get points, or no? Or does that go to the bank? Go to the center.
You should be able to. If you kill things with sabotages, you do kill it. So it's on your turn.
Okay, so I'm basically going to kill that. Then I'm also going to...
Otherwise, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to play the sabotages because you're spending a lot of money
I'm going to spend
for no
4
victory
money
points.
to put this on your tank,
Ow!
which won't kill it.
It loses its main gun and loses 2 hit points, ignoring armor. The heavy cannon is out. That's toast. Texas toast.
Yeah, that's basically useless now.
That's not useless. It's just
basically just a bullet sponge.
Yeah, 2 damage. Ouch.
So let's see, 7, so that's basically at -4 right now. Damage to tanks or aircraft. So I will spend 4 money. I'm going to... Yeah, I'm going to save these for money. So I'm going to, I think, kill off that heavy tank.
Oh, I don't think so.
What?
Still has armor.
It's I still have. It's at 5 health and it's still got its armor. It's not gonna be doing a lot of damage anymore, but.
Okay. So what was the armor on that?
2.
It's 2 armor. It's got 7
And infantry can't damage it unless it's explosive, but I think yours is.
Yes, you could still do a point of damage to me. You do another point.
Is that naturally on that? Is that a passive ability or armor?
Armor is always a passive
Armor's
ability.
passive, yeah.
Why?
You just took out my main gun, so the 5 damage that I was able to do, I can't do anymore.
Okay, just as a minor mechanical nitpick, it'd be easier since I'm writing things upside down if you just put like the armor under the HP, like 7 HP, 2 armor.
Yep, we've gotten feedback to add an armor.
Yeah, reading it upside down is a little difficult. That's a minor nitpick though.
Especially since it's passive, we could probably do an armor. We're planning to do an armor icon.
I'll still put the 1 hit on
And then I'd
it,
have
though, why
room to
not?
add different actions instead of just having armor.
I already got some points this turn.
Does that only deal 1 damage on that one, Jen?
It does 3, but since it subtracts 2.
All right, yeah, so the answer is
Then I
yes.
am going to...
Maybe with the light tank, it can be fast enough to run an infantry over.
Other pile.
For 7 for 11 money. Because I don't want to run out of money too bad. That is the end of my turn.
Cash money.
All right, let's see here.
But let's keep it going.
Oh, temporary armistice. All commanders can attack for 1 round, starting with this player. Armistice ends when it becomes this player's turn again.
Does
Okay.
that include sabotage cards or just attack?
I would say just attack abilities, so you'd be able to play buffs and sabotages just fine. Although that's something that I'll have to make a note.
My impression of that card, straight up, is boring.
Now that with how we've changed change the game, I would agree. So unless someone has a problem with that, I just ignore it and drive on. So we're going to remove Armistice. That's going to go away.
And this is things I've had to tell another developer is this is the fun part of your game. Don't make a power-up that takes away the fun.
Yeah, and we had skip turn cards and reverse turn cards, and we discovered that those made the game less fun. So
yeah, you don't
propose an Armistice?
Yes.
No!
You don't want people sitting around forever doing nothing.
No. Our Armistice was at the beginning of the game when we set everything up. I'm going to spend 3 to pick up. Oh, well, you know what? Since I can only do these cards anyway.
Well, we got rid of the Armistice.
Oh, we got rid of the Armistice. So that's...
Yeah, because if you left the Armistice out, I was going right for that yellow deck. Because that's the only thing that's interesting at that point of the game.
Right. We'll put out that, though.
That's good to get on video, because then I can actually explain design as it happens.
Yeah, that worked out.
Yeah! We're helping!
We like helping.
Let's get some sort of laughing sitcom in the background.
Alright, we're gonna do rocket bikes for 3.
Those are 2 because they're still the active effect.
The deflation is still active.
Cost 1 less.
Oh, everything costs 1 less. Oh, yay! Thank you. And then, man, I wish I was able to do enough damage to kill that. But I will be able to do enough. I'm going to place dual weapons, which doubles unit damage on infantry.
Snap!
And then then I'll save these.
Don't forget about his badass cigar.
Yes, he's got a badass cigar. All right, so I'm going to use my fire, doubling the damage, doing 6 damage to your medium tank, which is Kaboom Boom. Yeah.
Those rocket bikes certainly got a massive upgrade.
And then there are no aircraft, so the AA gun doesn't really do any damage. I can do 2 damage to your missile truck. And then I will attack him with Bob, doing 1 damage. Or no, 2 damage. 2 additional damage to the missile truck. Killing it. And Bob takes 2 damage?
2 damage, yeah. 2 damage.
1 damage from that. And then I would
So
be
the
done.
explodability is affected by armor too?
What's that?
The explodability is affected by armor? Because you reduced his damage by 1?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I want to clarify that somewhere.
Okay, so then what happened next is you played your freshly baked game Road Trip.
Wow.
So tell us about that.
It's not that freshly baked. I've been working on it for a while, but off and on. It's supposed to be a lighter micro game, and the design goal of it is that I want something where the players have to collaborate, but they have to try to sway the collaboration in a direction that benefits them. So it's not a co-op game, but everything that players are scoring on is supposed to be done mutually. That said, I'm not hitting it. It's too muddled the way it is right now. It's kind of hard to tell what's going to win. I mean, I could tweak some of the scoring values to get rid of some of the obvious issues with the last playthrough, but I don't yet have an answer on how to get the mechanics I have into the game I want.
Yeah, kind of talking about the core is not theirs, kind of what we've been talking about with some of these games.
I know what I want the core to be, but what I have is not satisfying that core, so I'm going to have to take the core idea that I want, and I'm going to have to build a completely new game up around it, so it's gonna stay a work in progress for quite some time. But that's not necessarily a bad outcome of a Protospiel. Here's a good thing to note: don't show up to a Protospiel with your first game all professionally printed and having sunk hundreds of dollars in it and attempting to get a publisher out day one. You're gonna have a bad time. If you got new stuff, make sure you treat it as new stuff and be ready to let go and be ready to accept criticism. And if you got kind of really close to polished stuff, again, let people know that. Again, though, if you hit really harsh criticism on a game game that you think is almost ready, and if you think it's valid criticism that's in line with your design goals, you still might have to make some major changes.
Okay, my next game that I played, me and Jason broke back off after this, and the game I played was called Gallant Greed, and it was by Riverwalker Entertainment, and this was a party game where you were trying to complete quests and collect either gold or glory. So you're either being gallant or greedy, as the title implied. And even more than interesting about talking the game is, as a tester, one of the most frustrating things is when I know there's something I don't like about a game, but I can't verbalize what that is. Either I can't really figure out what's bothering me, or I can figure it out, but I can't explain it very well. As a tester, that's super frustrating, and this is a game where that happened to me. I think my biggest problem with this game, and it might have been, the way they were talking, it might have been because they made some rule changes that were messing things up, but it felt like two separate games. There was like Event Deck the game and Completing Quests the game, and they weren't quite meshing together. I feel like each game separately was kind of fun, but that the two weren't meshing together very well, and that might have been because they severely shortened the Event Deck to make the game go faster, because one of their earlier complaints that day was the game was dragging. I think there's something good there, it just needs to be worked out more. Even more interesting is just that I hate that feeling of not being able to help because I can't get the words out. It's just stuck in my brain and I can't get it on the outside to help.
I find that's a common problem in reviewing design, both in games and in my real world job, that sometimes you're like, I don't like this, but I don't have a good answer as to what to do about it.
Yeah.
That's annoying. It's kind of useful to hear. It's obviously better if you can provide some kind of actionable request out of it, but sometimes it's just not there.
Yep. So after that, after learning 6 new games, my brain was frazzled. I can only learn so many new games in a day before my thoughts turn to mush. So I went off and played Pokemon, and you played one last game.
Yeah, I went looking around. I knew there were a few games that I saw that I wanted to try, and I didn't get in on any of those. But I got roped into one that was starting. It was Spies, Spaceships, and Super Lasers by Patrick Lindsay. It was a development and combat game in space, and I knew going in that I probably wasn't going to like it, because it's not my kind of game.
He's not a war game guy.
And I ended up being vindicated in that. So you're supposed to go around and settle things, but you're also supposed to go around and combat things. There were a few definitely interesting things about it, like there were 3 major resources, which he knew he had to rename: intelligence, influence, and spaceships. But intelligence and influence kept getting confused by the playtesters, and he knew that, so let's not rail on it. But you could control a planet. Once you control the planet, influence is out of the picture because you established a government on it, but it was still not too difficult for other people to come in and put intelligence on the planet, and then they could start sabotaging you, so you weren't really safe on your planet at any point, which interesting, but psychologically, I'm a Eurogamer, I want to build things up, and when all my things are getting unbuilt, it's kind of annoying to me.
Yeah, that's why I don't play Civ with you, because I build up these nice cities, and then you just come in and bomb them all!
The first game we played, I was the one who got nuked. So anyway, and we were playing 3-player, which presents a fundamental problem. I was trying to sit off in the corner and just develop my own business, and another player decided to build up a giant army and start attacking me. We had even strength armies, and I managed to win through the virtue of dice rolls, not through the virtue of any sort of skill or tactics. So I had his army pretty much destroyed, and I had half my army left, so I could have walked all over his stuff, but the third player was untouched, had a giant army, could just walked in and cleaned me up too. So basically, the problem is whoever attacks first is committing to losing the game, and whoever gets attacked is getting dragged down with them. So it's just straight up kingmaking. It's just, and I don't know that you can solve that in a 3-player game, but it's just not gonna be my kind of game. But there were a few interesting things about it. It was interesting that you went in and you spied on people and kind of could disrupt their stuff and do some stuff to them. So if it's your kind of thing, maybe you'd like it better than I would.
Yep.
Okay. One other thing I wanted to note in here, another flashback to Protospiel Chicago. I ran into Dusty again. He was the developer of After the Fall, which was the post-apocalyptic resource management game, and he told me that he had actually rather liked some of my suggestions from last time. So before in the game, your people were always trending towards death, and you were losing people over the course of the game, which is pretty thematic. It's also kind of psychologically frustrating. So he reworked the game a bit to make it so that your people were kind of teetering on the brink, but you weren't always just steadily progressing towards losing them. I didn't get a chance to play it again, but it's always good to hear that you gave useful, constructive feedback that helped to improve the product.
And it's actually kind of funny now that we've been going to several of these events. I'm starting to recognize a lot of faces, and I'm recognizing Randy and Dusty and Brett, and I'm actually getting to know these people, and that's been kind of fun.
Yeah, seeing there's several published game designers that show up to the ones floating around this area.
It looks like they might have actually been testing a expansion to Role Player. I'm excited for that.
Yep, Role Player is a game by Keith Majetka, I'm not sure to pronounce his name, who's based in Madison, so this is his local Protospiel, and he's got a published game, Role Player, that went through several of these Protospiels as well. I know I've seen it been tested, and I've gotten a chance to play the final product, and while the theming is not really my thing, because it's create a D&D character, but it's actually a dice manipulation game, so it's actually my kind of game, despite the theme kind of saying, hey, you don't play role-playing games, you might not like this, but it's just a theme, and the gameplay is actually pretty solid. I wanted to cover one last thing, since I seem to keep seeing it come up at Protospiels, a little bit about table etiquette. At the last Protospiel Madison, there were some issues with people just setting up their games on tables all day, which was resulting in there being not enough tables for people to actually run demos of their games. For this year, they added a table tag that you could buy, which would give you the option to
basically bogart a table.
To squat on a table, or at least half a table for the entire day, and I think that was a good idea. However, I did see at least one group who was at the last Protospiel and was guilty of squatting on a table all day, even when they weren't present at the table for hours on end, leaving their game set up, and they came back this year, did not buy a table tag badge, and did it again. I'd like to point out how incredibly rude this is to other designers. I also noticed several groups who kind of came in and set up their game and just did playtests of their own game all day. At least most of them were there all day, but it's still generally good etiquette to test your game, go around, give some back to other people as well. It's not just for your game. So if you bring...
the actual people running this suggest that you give as many hours as you get. So if you have 3 people help you with your game for 1 hour each, that's 3 hours. Then you should give out 3 hours to other people.
I kind of make an adjustment for this if you bring multiple people for your game. Like, I ran my games, they probably took 3 hours for 3 people who weren't me each game, so that's 9 hours. I probably didn't give 9 hours in testing myself, but I had Jen as well in my party, so between the two of us, we gave out what we put in.
Most developers respect that. Once again, 90% of the people, they're cool, they're doing the right thing, they're being polite, they're giving as much as they take. Those other 10% of people, shame on you, stop doing bad things.
But I'd much rather the people who are running their game all day. That's so much better than setting your game up and walking away for 4 hours.
Yeah, and it actually wasn't as much of a problem this year because there was enough table space to where there was usually 1 or 2 tables open, but it has caused problems in the past of I can't play a game because there's no table space because someone's bogarting a table and not even using it. So.
But just remember, it's a collaborative event. If you want to turn it into a showcase for your own game, pay the extra money, and then I think we'll all be good.
But let's not end on a negative note. It was still a really good event. I saw a lot of, even things that weren't particularly my genre, I saw a lot of potential in. It was a Protospiel full of potential. There was even the games that I didn't particularly like I don't want to dump on games, but even the games I didn't particularly like, I still feel there was a lot of potential there. Like, with more work, they could become good games, even if they weren't good games yet.
I think ultimately, in all the Protospiels I've done, I've only hit a few games that were really dump-worthy.
Really just burn the whole thing down.
Yep.
This is never going to work.
There was definitely one, and we know what it is, and we won't mention it. But I think I'm in a similar boat. Most of the stuff I played had at least something interesting about it. There were definitely a few I didn't like. There were a couple that I did. I was happy to see one of my games do well. I was less happy to see one of my games do poorly, but it kind of is what it is. But what's kind of funny is last week I had a guy who really liked it, but he's a really light gamer, so.
The winners for me was Atmos Pug, but that's not surprising because it's pretty much in the polish phase. It's pretty much done. And I was really surprised by Card Commander because I usually hate take that kind of games where everyone's blowing each other up, but they actually managed to balance it in a way where it actually was fun for me.
Yep, Card Commander was the big winner of the games I played. I know there were about 3 other games I saw floating around that I really would have liked to have gotten a chance to play, but
there's only so many hours
there's
in
so
a day.
many hours, only so much brain, only so much battery left on Jen's Pokemon Go.
Oh my gosh, I caught like 40 Pokemon. It was a huge spawn point.
Okay, that's a different podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Analysis Paralysis. We should be putting a video out for a Feast of Odin pretty soon, so if you're into Rosenberg, if you're not into Rosenberg, why are you listening to our show in the first place? But if you're into Rosenberg, that should be a good one, and we're hoping to get back to the actual strategy videos in November and through December, through the winter, when nothing else happens. All right, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.